The name of the show is The Way to Go. Tonight's guest is Sigurd Hall. We're going to be talking about some of the behind-the-scenes things that are necessary to make a feature film. And the feature film that Mr. Hall is making now is a film called Paranoia. Welcome.
Thanks, Alan.
Good. So when did you come up with the idea of having this feature film?
Well, at the longest, I would say it's maybe, I don't know. It was last time I was back visiting my family, so that was 9 months at most ago. I got the idea actually because I was like, I'd recently rewatched First Blood, which is a classic film. Regardless of whether you like action films or not, it's actually a really well-made film.
I love that film, by the way. It was one of the first films I saw when I got to Hollywood, but I'm sorry to interrupt.
But anyway, and I noticed that it was written by a guy as a novel, so I picked it up. It's written by a man named David Morrell, who then actually took his idea from, and the book is also called First Blood, and he took his idea from another book that was called Rogue Male, which is by a man who, I believe his name is Jeffrey Household, which they're basically chase novels about, you know, men who are basically have gotten into a really bad situation and have odds completely stacked against them, and they have a chance to die. And I was like, well, that's interesting, but what if I put shapeshifters in there? And I thought about doing it in like the woods, because my parents have 110 acres out in Washington State, and I was like, it'd be really cool if we kind of do like a Predator meets Thing kind of thing, and it just didn't work. And then when I got back to New York, I realized what I was missing was, if you have people that can change their shape, the scariest thing would be is if you're being chased by people who can change their shape, in a city like New York, where there's people everywhere, so literally anybody that walks down the street could be your enemy.
So when you say shape changers, is that what it is?
Well,
what do you call it?
I guess the term I'm using is shapeshifter.
Shifter. Okay. So so basically, it would take like a human being and make them look like another human being. Is that the deal? Or
it's a little more complicated than that, at least with how the science of mine is, or the world that this is set in, is they don't actually just look like it. They aren't like the character Mystique in X-Men. So say if you were to change into me, you might not necessarily know everything that I know,
right,
but your body would be more adept at doing things that I would be doing. You know, because of the fact that I used to run a lot, you know, you might be able to find that you can run further distances, or because the fact that, you know, you are more adept at doing math. Right. I might be able to then solve equations I wouldn't necessarily be able to do in my own body. And I might crave the kinds of foods that you like. Things like that.
So it's almost like the molecular level that you're changing.
Exactly.
Right.
But at the same time, they still have the, I guess, motivation. So you're like, I still need to get to X, Y, Z. Even if I change into him or her or whoever, it doesn't matter.
Okay, so so you came up with this idea.
Yes.
So, you know, you come up with an idea. What do you do then? I mean, like, do you write it down? Do you just think about it all the time? I mean, what progresses an idea to say we're going to make this movie?
Well, at first, my buddy, whose name, weirdly enough, is random, and I'm not joking about that. He's actually a very good friend of mine. He and I met in Seattle when we were both working in film. He was up, either he was just about to move back down to LA, or he was up visiting in Seattle. So he came out to my parents' farm, and we grabbed as many people as we could. And we grabbed his iPad, and we're just like, we'll see if this works. So then we grabbed a bunch of airsoft guns, and we just kind of started doing a little bit of a chase movie. I hope to God he erased it because it was bad. But it at least gave us an idea of, hey, this wasn't going to work in the original setting. So then I came back to New York and I was like, well, Marathon Man is one of my other favorite films. So what if I kind of blend this, this idea with Marathon Man, where you have Dustin Hoffman literally getting chased by people he doesn't necessarily know, and at times there were people he didn't know were actually chasing him,
Right.
and he thought that they were on his side.
So that's interesting. So you came up with this idea. When do you put like pen to paper?
Normally it's pretty quick. Okay. And when I'm writing, I'm a little more detailed than a lot of people. I've actually gotten to the point where I've read more than 100 books on screenwriting, and I'm not exaggerating on that because I'm a very thorough anal might be the right term for it. But yeah, I want to know what I'm doing before I dive in too much. I found out what the best screenwriting program was, so I purchased it. Final Draft for anybody who don't know that. But anyway, I found that 3 of the writers were the ones that I liked the most, being Blake Snyder, who is known for Save the Cat, Sid Field, who is kind of like the Dalai Lama of screenwriting, and then a man named Tom Lazarus, who I only know of one movie that he actually wrote. It's called Stigmata, but he wrote an amazing book about screenwriting. And basically, when you take the 3 of those, even though I've read a bunch of other authors, they're the ones I take from the most, and they're the ones who gave me the best melding of all the information, because everybody has only so much information that can be told. But the 3 of them tell it in such a way that I don't know, I think it was the best laid out.
Okay.
And then I write lots and lots of notes.
So then you write it down, and how many rewrites do you have before you actually start thinking about production?
Actually, I've perfected pretty much only having to do 1 or 2 rewrites.
Okay, cool.
Because what I do is I immediately do the 7 major points in a movie. I do the very beginning of the movie, which would also then be considered the beginning of Act 1. I then do the end of Act 1. I do the beginning of Act 2. I do the midpoint, the end of Act 2, and then I do the final ending. And when I do all those, I already know what direction the film has to go. So I know every point A to point B.
So it's almost like a summary version of a storyboard. I mean,
it's a verbal storyboard,
right.
But I get so in depth that I literally get to the point that I know what's going to be on every single page.
Interesting. Okay, so when you get to that point, what's the next step?
Well, then I also right after I've done all that, I have to do a character biography of every single character. So I know who the people are and I know how they're going to react, because otherwise I feel like I'm just having cardboard cutouts, because I need them to become as real as possible. Because then I might have things that happen where a character would not do an action that I had planned out. And I'm like, well, what? And then I have to rethink and I have to go from there.
Okay. And when I think from previous conversations we had, that you sometimes build the characters based on human beings that you know in real life.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Actually, the main character of the latest project that I'm working on, definitely had something that I would say would be somewhere in a mix between Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney mixed with, say, Dustin Hoffman, going back to Marathon Man.
Right.
But something along those lines.
But also, I think you also mentioned that you actually have people that you know that you've already thought of putting in that combining that person with the character that you're creating.
Oh, at times, absolutely.
Right.
Like, that usually is later on. That usually gets to be when I get to the casting part.
Okay, so that's further down.
Yeah,
the road.
yeah, because basically all I have to do is say, okay, who do I want this character to be? And if I want them to be, you know, some absolute lunatic, I might be like, well, I'm going to have this character act and talk like Nicolas Cage.
Right.
You know.
Absolutely.
Or, you know, I could be like, well, you know, I want this, you know, nice motherly type. I'm going to base her off of, you know, my friend Aliza, who's, you know, she's a DJ out in, you know, the Michigan area. You know, it's like, I will base it around people I do know, sometimes even people I don't know, but I've seen them on TV enough that I have an idea of how they speak, the kinds of roles they'll take, things like that.
Do you ever mix it up a little bit, like have someone who's really crazy, but make them look like they cast someone who's acts normal?
Oh, of course, absolutely. I actually prefer that. I actually prefer going against character type,
Right.
because sometimes that's where some of the most interesting performances have happened.
Right.
In film. Like, I just saw a movie called Lockout. Yeah, it should Lockout or Lock Up. But it was Luc Besson presents, which is the guy who did Fifth Element and The Professional. Right. But he did one, or he was somehow involved with this movie that was Guy Pearce was the main character. And although I'd known that Guy Pearce used to be in really good shape, he's never really been like an action star.
Right.
And then in this one, he was kind of like the wisecracking action star. And it was, as I was watching, it's like, we really kind of missed out on not seeing this guy do these roles that, you know, we might have thrown Bruce Willis or with Sylvester Stallone into.
Yeah, but I don't know. Just talking from the standpoint of a 57-year-old new actor again, you know, it's never too late. You know, I think that, you know, it might broaden his horizons rather than, you know, worry about what happened in the past.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he didn't do some amazing work in the time. I mean, Memento was incrable. So was LA Confidential.
Oh, that was fantastic. I love that movie.
He's an absolutely phenomenal actor.
Yeah.
I would never say anything but. I mean, he made a couple poopers, but who doesn't, you know? It happens because sometimes a screenplay looks good, as I'm sure you've seen.
Oh, yes.
And then when it goes on screen, it doesn't
translate.
Yeah. So, you know, but the man himself is amazing. And this just, I guess, solidified that, again, he could branch into yet another area that I hadn't been like, yeah, like I'd always thought he would be good in a role like that, but I'd never actually seen him do it.
Okay, so at this point, then I'd like to ask you about like the casting, the actual. I mean, once you get the characters set, which I think that's what you're into at this point. Then is casting next, or is that?
I mean, there's a bunch of little crap that you have to start doing. Like you have to start getting the crew together. And I'm pretty fortunate, first of all, to own some of my own equipment, and then know a lot of people who know equipment and own their own equipment.
Right.
So I'm really, really fortunate to have those people in my life.
That's good.
So that part is actually pretty easy, but that honestly, even before you cast, has to be done, because if there's no camera on the set, then you have a play in the middle of somebody's...
So how much ahead of the time do you have to set up, have your crew set before you start thinking about casting?
Oh God, if it was an ideal world...
That's what I'm talking about.
If it was an ideal world, 6 months to a year.
Okay.
Absolutely, because then I would be like, you are showing up on these days, you are blocking off these hours. I don't care if you're not going to sleep, you're going to be there. Okay. Because, like I said, it's like if you don't have a guy with a microphone, camera doesn't do a whole lot.
Right. So, okay, so 6 months pass after you got your crew together, and then now it's time to do the casting.
Yeah, casting, as I have found, tends to actually be something you do maybe, I would say, a month or two ahead of time, and not any sooner, because then people will be like, oh, I found the dream role. I am going to be playing Aladdin in this children's theater, and it is going to make my career, and I will be amazing.
Right.
And then they drop out, and then I'm sitting here and I'm like, we have 2 weeks until filming, and that's when.
So how much preparation? Okay, I'll put it this way, because there are
Yes.
situations where actors drop out of productions,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that in some, you like rehearsals and things like that if you can get them, but
If I can get them.
right.
Yes.
But how much time do you think most actors need to?
Honestly, I think it's a lot less as long as they do any sort of preparation.
So but do you think, is there too much preparation?
Oh, there absolutely is. There's both sides. There's too much and too little. Too little obviously means that you show up and you're.
Right.
But then at the same time,
Right.
if you have prepared too much, all of a sudden you focus on just what you're saying and nothing else.
But I would say, yeah, I could see that. But the other thing, I think though, that sometimes, I guess, who was it? Sir Laurence Olivier said that, you need to do a part 250 times before you get it or whatever.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, and trust me, I totally agree with that. I mean, when I acted, I did some Shakespeare, and trust me, like, I will never, ever say, do not sit and go over your lines
Right.
ad nauseum.
Right.
Like, but after a while, you just kind of have. I mean,
You're right.
it's like swimming. Like, there's only so much time that you can prepare a kid to swim before you throw them in the water.
And the other thing is, though, I find that, like, I used to do a lot more repetitive, I'd go into my basement with my weights and go over my lines and all this, but sometimes I would do it, and then after a while I'd lose it. You know what I mean? You have it memorized, and then you start questioning your memorization and all this. So I could see, I could see too much, but at the same time, if you really have it, then you don't have to think about it.
That problem that you're mentioning actually has something to do with what you're doing, actually.
Okay.
Because, say, if you're running your lines and you start, lifting weights, that means that you need that stimulus
Right.
of you lifting weights to bring back that memory. It's just
sense memory. Right.
It's just like the fact that psychologists have tested people who will go and binge drink, and then they'll give them certain things to memorize.
Right.
They won't remember it as long as they're sober, but then when you get them drunk again.
But that's why one of my techniques before I act a lot of times is to do push-ups, because I took this acting course, and I bought a 10-pack but only used 4 classes. But that's a side issue. But one thing was to get my what my acting coach had told me is that you doing something physical helps your breathing and helps you get into a certain zone, and as a result of that, I think that way, and it gets me there.
Well,
works,
whether it's
right.
whether it's true or a placebo, who cares? Because
Right.
it does what it needs to.
Right. So, what happens when people start, saying that they're going to be in your show, and then, so we're over there. The person calls up saying, "Listen, I'm going to be Bambi in Disney's next production." So what do you do? I mean, do you panic? How do you? Where do you get your? How do you do your audition process?
Well, at that point, usually I thank them for being upfront, because at least they told me that they're not going to be there, because sometimes people just don't show up, which is awesome. In the dictionary sense of inspiring on wonder.
Right.
And so it's like, well, thank you for telling me. I'm going to hang up the phone now. Good luck. And then I turn into the Incredible Hulk, break about, half of New York, and then I go back to, okay, now I've relaxed.
Right.
Now I've gotten that out of my system,
Right.
and I'm usually able to get it out of my system within a day, I would say a day or two.
Okay, so let's get back to paranoia, though. 'cause
Yes, absolutely.
In specific.
Sure.
So at this stage of the game, where are you with paranoia?
Well, we thought we were going to be in production, but we had hiccups.
Right.
Hiccups happen. We weren't in production. So now, square one isn't exactly the right way to say it, because I still have a screenplay. I still have half or so of the cast, and I still have one location. I still have costumes, oddly enough. I've got makeup. Like, I've got all these things that are pretty ready.
Right.
But now I'm finding that not having shot it when I thought I was going to has opened other avenues.
Now, another question, though. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm involved in something like a secret project
Yes.
that we're doing a sizzle reel for. And I mean, is that a possibility to attract people to?
Absolutely. Like when I first started getting into the New York thing, some of the guys that I ended up meeting, like, that was how most TV shows are pitched, is actually they usually have a sizzle and a pilot.
Right.
Because then somebody who's connected will go to a studio head and be like, hey, I have this 3-minute video. I know you have a lot of time, but maybe when you're in the bathroom,
Right.
you need something to watch.
So would you possibly go in that direction with paranoia, or is that not? You don't think that's for this project? It's not the direction you want to go into.
I don't think it's the direction I want to go with, because originally I was planning on playing the lead.
Right.
However, at this point, because I'm kind of reinventing the whole thing, I'm like, if I could choose ideally, and obviously I can't choose Dustin Hoffman because he's almost old enough to be my grandfather. I mean, technically he's more close to father, but whatever. Right. It's like, who in the 20-year-old range could I choose? And I started doing what I always do, which is going on IMDb, which is great because if you have an IMDb Pro page, you can get a hold of agents and things like that. And I found that actually my first choice only has like one project going this year, and it's already in post-production. So it's like, I might be able to get him for a steal.
That would be great.
So there's that. So now, like you're saying, you know, how many rewrites do you do? Like, now I'm definitely, well, I'm not sure I call this rewriting, but I'm definitely polishing to make sure that it's going to read really well, so that I can be like, and I always send my stuff off to at least 10 people to read, to say, okay, how does this read? How's the story? What's wrong with this? Because not every single person will actually give me the same info, and it will at least give me ideas of where I might need to go.
So what's the ETA on the project?
It has to be a winter project.
Okay, so it's going to be next year probably?
If all goes as planned, it will be next winter.
Okay. Do you have anything in the interim that you're working on other than Paranoia?
Well, I have a book that's being edited. My editor and I were just talking 2 or 3 days ago, and she's on chapter 23 or 24 of 33.
Right.
And then I have another book that I've started, and it's going on the slow side because Paranoia is my -- project at this point.
But you know me, Mr. Selfish over here. How about any new film projects that you might be working on?
There is definitely something that I've been talking to one of my buddies about that is going to be related to Paranoia.
Oh, really?
So it's not that it's going to be a sizzle reel or anything like that. It's going to be basically a short film in the same universe, so that we can show people this is what the movie will be like.
Okay. That's interesting. That's it's almost like a slight teaser.
Exactly. It'll be something that leads in, like the way.
That's interesting.
Like, it'll be like the beginning of a James Bond movie. The beginning of the James Bond movie never has anything to do with the direct story.
Yeah, but it has a lot of beautiful women.
Well, if things go as planned, so will mine.
Yeah, well, I hope one of them in particular, which will remain nameless at this point, joins the project, because I enjoyed working with her on a different project. So, anything else, though? I mean, in terms of, so you're doing, how's the blog doing? I mean,
honestly, I don't really touch the blog as much as I probably should.
you had a lot of followers for that.
Oh, no, I do. I have like 1,000, and I still try to tease people every once in a while, and we do actually have what I consider a proper logo, which I actually had my buddy, who's a graphic designer, even though I used to do that stuff.
Yeah.
My Photoshop's not up and running, so I was like, hey, friend, I was wondering if you might want to take this on. And she actually did a really cool one. It's the one that's actually on
cool.
there.
That's nice.
And I don't see why that will ever change, because it just is.
Well, that's it. I'm so looking forward to Paranoia. You have no idea. I mean, like, of course, I guess hopefully there'll still be the dad part in it, or Pops, or whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's the thing is, I don't, like, there was one moment in the whole thing that people, I don't necessarily know whether it was negative that they reacted toward it, but they definitely, there were a lot of questions that came up, and I don't really like when people are like, well, I don't understand why this happened. Because I like to explain things, even if you don't get the whole story. And people were always like, because at first I was like, oh, people can change shape because they take a specific pill. And people were like, well, why didn't you expand on the whole pill thing? And I was like, because I just needed my, and I can't think of the word for it, but I just needed my, my silver bullet. I needed the one thing that causes everything to happen.
But do you find, that if you lose someone along the way, that you lost them for the movie? In terms of if someone, like if you're watching a movie and then you don't get it, is that distraction enough for just one piece of the movie enough to?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because I know for myself, and I'm a pretty decent movie watcher. I get things pretty fast. I figured out that Bruce Willis was dead before I even went and saw Sixth Sense, because I was like, it's a kid who's like, I see dead people. And he's talking to Bruce Willis. And I'm like,
Well, I really I can't wait till Paranoia gets up and running again. And, we're getting to the end of the show right now. I know we have so much more we could talk about.
absolutely.
And but it was really great having you on the show. And I'm really looking forward to continuing being your friend, and continuing working with you.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
So I guess I'm going to say good night. Take care. Thanks for coming on the show.
Of course.
And
thank you.
that's a wrap.